Good morning everybody. Today the topic of our discussion is parturition and lactation. So first, what is parturition? Parturition is normal and smooth delivery of the baby from the mother's womb. Throughout the pregnancy until parturition, 36 weeks, we see that the mother nurtures the fetus and there is no uterine contractions. There is quiescence of the uterus. Now, just before parturition, we see the uterus becomes excitable and the labor contraction starts and the parturition sets in. This is followed by lactation of the mother. Now, after this session, you will be able to know about what is parturition and its stages, causes leading to the uterine contractions and expulsion of baby. So long the uterus was quiet, what leads to its contraction, and in this the hormones are the main concern you must be knowing, and what are the changes in the reproductive tract. And in lactation we must be knowing about the breast development and preparation for lactation and the mechanism of milk production and secretion.
Of the baby or parturition is to deliver a healthy, mature baby.
Now we'll briefly know about the stages of labor and the hormones mainly involved in those stages. It will be discussed in details in subsequent discussions. Now, during stage G0 of labor, this is a quiescent phase. That is, uterus is refractory to contractions and it nurtures the developing fetus. And the hormones mainly involved in this stage is progesterone along with the human chorionic gonadotropin and relaxin. Next, the stage 1, which is the initiation of labor, and this completes by complete cervical dilatation. So during this phase there is softening and effacement of the cervix and the uterus and uterus muscles. The uterine muscles become now more excitable and enters into the contractile phase. This phase is primed by estrogen, with the rising level of estrogen during just before parturition and the falling level of progesterone, so there is a shifting, and the initiation is mainly done by corticotropin releasing hormone along with the prostaglandins. Stage 2 of labor is the active labor, where it starts from the complete cervical dilatation to the delivery of the baby, and here the main hormone involved is the maternal oxytocin. The maternal oxytocin, by a positive feedback mechanism, as the baby goes into the birth canal, the dilatation of cervix leads to the Ferguson reflex, and this reflex leads to the positive feedback of maternal oxytocin to continue the labor, and this is definitely helped by the prostaglandins E2 and F2 alpha. And the final stage is the stage 3 of labor, which is the complete delivery of baby with expulsion of placenta and final uterine contraction, and this is mainly mediated by maternal oxytocin.
Number 1, the hormones which are concerned with parturition. Now, birth hormones which are present, whether it's from the mother or the baby, they always help to accomplish the desired result. So one thing is, it has to get the mother's body ready to give birth. For that there has to be starting of labor contractions or uterine contractions, preparing the baby for labor and life outside the mother's body. You have to prepare the baby as such. The mother has to be prepared, the baby has to be prepared. And to fulfill one more thing is to initiate breast milk or lactation. Now, what are the hormones of pregnancy and parturition? More or less they are common: estrogen, progesterone, oxytocin, corticotropin, cortisol, relaxin, prostaglandin, adrenaline, endorphins. So in different stages, there are changes in the values or secretions of these hormones. Now this is the endocrine pattern related to parturition. So it is, you can see the pink is progesterone, you can see that it is coming down. Placental lactogen is green. Again you can see after parturition it is coming down. Progesterone is coming down before parturition. Placental lactogen is coming down after parturition. Estrogen is also coming down while after parturition, also when it is sort of completed, then the estrogen is coming down. Glucocorticoids is highest during parturition and prolactin. So these are the two main things which are very, very important for. But another thing that you can see is estrogen is also important. So coming to this, one thing is the normal duration of pregnancy is 270 days from the day of fertilization. The near term, the level of progesterone diminishes. What is usually the function of progesterone is that it is a uterine relaxant. It inhibits action of oxytocin on the uterus and it reduces gap junction in the myometrium. Now, what are these gap junctions? We have already done, at least you must remember, in cardiac tissue or cardiac muscle, you have read about gap junctions. What do? They help to transmit information faster. So this is reduced in case of progesterone. There is increase in estrogen level due to increase in dihydrotestosterone. So you can see, because one thing that we studied in, or we mentioned in the fetoplacental unit, was that most of the estrol is coming from the fetus. So the fetus, placenta and the mother, they are working in contraction. So because of the DHEAS which is produced in the fetus as well as the mother, the estriol level shows the well-being of the fetus. That is something that we mentioned in the last topic. What does estrogen do? Estrogen helps to increase oxytocin receptors. So estrogen is present before that, before pregnancy, before parturition. Makes the uterus more excitable, increases gap junction and causes more production of prostaglandins, which have a function of increasing uterine contraction. So uterine contraction is increased with the oxytocin, with prostaglandins, and estrogen helps to have more effect of oxytocin on the receptors, myometrial receptors. But why, in spite of having this estrogen, it does not act, or this contraction don't set in? The contractions have to start setting in. Labor has to start. So what prevents?
Now, corticotropin releasing hormone is another very important hormone secreted by fetal hypothalamus and supplemented by placental CRH. Now, as we all know, this cortisol level hastens the fetal lung maturity by increasing type 2 alveolar cells, which has to produce adequate surfactant. Now, the fetus after birth, when the baby is born, it has to breathe on its own. So, this lung maturity is one of the very, very important factor for subsistence of the baby after birth. And very interestingly, this optimal level of CRH, which produces adequate cortisol for adequate surfactant production, is a very important hormone for initiation of labor or timing of parturition by signaling through the prostaglandins. It also can directly act through the R1 and R2 receptors on the human myometrium to initiate parturition, and more so, it induces the oxytocin sensitivity and oxytocin induced labor contractions by modulating the prostaglandin hormone. So we can say that CRH is one of the hormone which initiates the labor activity or induces the labor in human being. Now, oxytocin is one of the most important hormone for the continuation and maintenance of labor contractions. Now, the oxytocin receptors in the myometrium increases gradually after 28th week. Till 28th week, uterus is not sensitive to oxytocin. Now, there is gradual increase up to 100 folds, and just by before birth or before parturition, we see that the oxytocin receptor concentration is as high as 200 folds, and this is the priming of estrogen for the labor contraction in the uterus. So these oxytocin receptors are increased in the uterus by estrogen. Now, oxytocin itself is a very powerful uterine contractor, and it not only maintains contraction, strong contractions of uterus, but it also thins out, softens and dilates the cervix. So it helps the baby to move down the birth canal, and during the final stages, the third stage, we see that it pushes out the placenta as well, and this pushing out of placenta will help to limit or reduce the bleeding at the sites of placenta, because placenta gets constricted, and it also helps to constrict the uterine vessels. So oxytocin at the third stage of delivery reduces the bleeding as well. And one very important thing here we must consider is that during labor and birth, as the baby goes down the birth canal, the pressure of baby against the cervix and against the pelvic floor stimulates oxytocin release, and this is a reflex action which is known as Ferguson reflex. And due to this Ferguson reflex, the oxytocin goes on increasing, and there is a positive feedback of oxytocin secretion. Now, thus oxytocin secretion during labor is a positive feedback mechanism. We have already studied that in positive feedback mechanism, the action which is going on is being increased or elaborated by the subsequent effect. That is, as the fetal head impinges on the cervix, the stretching of the cervix will increase the maternal oxytocin secretion, and this is known as Ferguson reflex, as we are already been discussing. And this sets up the afferent signals for more oxytocin secretion from the posterior pituitary. And as the level of oxytocin rises, it causes more uterine contractions, and again there is more oxytocin secretion. So a positive feedback is established till the baby is delivered.
Oxytocin increases. So the whole summary is oxytocin increases uterine contraction, acts directly on the uterine smooth muscles to contract, stimulates formation of prostaglandins, and prostaglandins again enhance oxytocin induced contractions.
Now, prostaglandins are another important paracrine hormone that helps in labor contraction. Prostaglandin helps both in initiation of labor as well as sustenance or maintenance of labor contractions. So, in any phase of pregnancy, if prostaglandin is given from outside or the level of prostaglandin rises, then uterus goes into contraction. So, prostaglandin is a very important hormone for the initiation as well as for the maintenance of labor. And in this respect, the two important prostaglandins which act are PGE2 and F2 alpha, mainly secreted from the uterine residual cells. Prostaglandins have three main effects. One is it has very strong contractile action on the uterine myometrium by increasing the calcium concentration and subsequent smooth muscle contractions. And PGF2 alpha, it increases formation of gap junctions. Now this increased gap junctions help in the contractility of the uterine smooth muscles. So the synchronous contraction of the uterine muscle occurs due to increased gap junction, and this increased number of gap junctions also potentiates the contraction effect of oxytocin. So contractions induced by oxytocin. And lastly but not the least, prostaglandin also helps in the effacement of the cervix, that is the softening, the dilatation and thinning of the cervix, which helps the baby to go down the birth canal, and this occurs in the early stages of labor, that is in the stage 1. So this is also helped by prostaglandin. So prostaglandin has very important role in the labor contractions. So here is a schematic representation of initiation of labor by study.com. Now here in this picture you see that the hormones which are involved in the initiation of labor are CRH, corticotrophin releasing hormone, which actually increases the cortisol level, and when the optimum cortisol level reaches to lung maturity, then only the effective CRH will initiate the labor contractions. And definitely prostaglandin has a very critical role to play in initiation of labor, and estrogen in priming the uterus. But the hormone which has to be effaced, or which the effect has to be negated, is progesterone. And we find that the estriol, which mainly is synthesized by the DHEAs of the fetal origin, increases during term when the fetus matures, and this high level will inhibit the progesterone and initiate the labor contractions. And the progesterone also is itself, the level is falling down, and this corticotrophin releasing hormone stimulates the estriol as well as the prostaglandins, and the prostaglandins, the estriol and the helps in softening and relaxation of the cervix, that is effacement, not the relaxed uterus, and we see that there is initiation of labor. So in initiation of labor, of the estrogen primed uterus is the corticotrophin releasing hormone as well as prostaglandin, and definitely the hormone which has to be effaced out is progesterone.
So to prevent it from being delivered beforehand or by prematurity. So if you can see that there is a fetus, it is giving rise to prostaglandins. So you can placenta is giving rise to progesterone. It inhibits uterine contraction, so it is blocked. Estrogen, it promotes oxytocin, but then it inhibits the progesterone. Pituitary is giving rise to oxytocin. It promotes uterine contraction. So in a cycle, the prostaglandins, oxytocin, estrogen, all these promote uterine contractions for the delivery of the baby. This is one more picture. On one side is estrogen from ovaries, which induces oxytocin receptors, making them work, increasing gap junctions, making them more susceptible. Estrogen makes the receptors more susceptible to oxytocin. And oxytocin from the fetus and the mother's posterior pituitary, they stimulate uterine contraction, they stimulate the placenta to make prostaglandins, and which stimulates more vigorous contraction of the uterus. So more the vigorous contraction, more positive feedback, more oxytocin, and this cycle. So the positive feedback of oxytocin once again is baby pushes against the cervix, causing it to stretch. Stretching of the cervix causes nerve impulse to be sent to the brain. Brain stimulates posterior pituitary to release oxytocin. and oxytocin causes smooth muscle lining of the uterus to contract. And more the contraction, more the baby pushes against the cervix. So this cycle goes on till this positive feedback goes on till the baby is. Now, this one thing is that during parturition, if the mother is more fearful or is not feeling relaxed, then it is adrenaline which is getting secreted also. Apart from whatever other hormones are working, adrenaline. When adrenaline is working, it normally sort of tightens the muscle. Energy is sent to the limbs, sensitivity to pain becomes more. And the signs are the person is in tension, is a high-pitched voice, she will be crying, she will be yelling. On the other hand, if the mother feels supported, loved, safe, her privacy is maintained, there is a skin-to-skin touch, either allow the husband to be there to make her relax, or you, the attending physician, the surgeon, attending surgeon, is more sympathetic towards the mother, then it is oxytocin or endorphin which starts secreting. So then the muscles relaxes. Energy is sent to the uterus, pain sensitivity decreases, and there is sign of relaxation. Rhythm is low husky voice. So what we are trying to tell you is that the mother should feel supported, or you have to be compassionate with the mother because she is going through a terrible pain or a terrible situation during that time, which of course she is going to forget the moment she looks at her baby. So this is something you can say at home about parturition, is be more compassionate with the mother so that there is more release of oxytocin, and endorphins, so the delivery of the baby is easier.
So, to summarize the hormonal events in pregnancy and parturition, we can say that maintenance of pregnancy is the function of progesterone. Progesterone promotes uterine quiescence along with the human chorionic gonadotropin and as well as relaxin, which relaxes the uterus and maintains the cervical rigidity, that is, prevents the softening of the cervix and effacement. At the same time, it inhibits the action of oxytocin on the uterine muscles. It inhibits the corticotropin releasing hormone, inhibits the prostaglandins, and hence inhibit, in one word, the entire event of labor. Now, estrogen, on the other hand, we see negate all the actions of progesterone, that is, it inhibits the cervical rigidity, increases uterine contractions, and thus negate the uterine quiescence, increase the prostaglandin secretion, as well as increases the oxytocin receptors on the uterus for the oxytocin to act. Now, so what actually switches off this progesterone activity into estrogen activity during labor? Now, as we have said, one of the very important hormone is CRH, which you see that increases during term, which increases the optimum cortisol level for lung maturity and at the same time increases the level of estrogen, so that the oxytocin receptors are 80 to 100 fold increased just before term and during parturition, so that the oxytocin can overcome the inhibition of progesterone and act for the uterine contraction. And another very important or crucial role is played by the prostaglandins, which we see is the key mediator. The CRH acts through prostaglandins, estrogen acts through prostaglandins, and it is being only inhibited by progesterone. Now, during term, as the DHEA or the dihydroepiandrosterone produced from the fetus increases. As the fetal maturity increases, the DHEA production increases, so the estrogen production increases just before parturition, whereas progesterone starts falling. And this is another important mechanism by which estrogen can negate the functions of falling progesterone level and can induce the labor contractions or parturition. And definitely the critical level of prostaglandins, which increases the oxytocin sensitivity of the uterus and itself also helps in uterine contraction and cervical ripening, along with the estrogen and oxytocin induces the labor contraction. And once the oxytocin can act on the uterine myometrium, then there is a positive feedback role. More the oxytocin is secreted, more is the uterine contraction, and this is by the optimum oxytocin secreted from the fetal and placenta. Now, as the more of uterine contraction and as baby goes down the birth canal, as there is cervical stretching, the Ferguson reflex is activated and more of oxytocin is secreted from the posterior pituitary. And this positive feedback goes on until the labor is completed. So we can say that CRH, prostaglandin, along with the estrogen, which takes over or negate the functions of progesterone, helps in the induction of labor, whereas oxytocin maintains the labor contraction. It cannot induce, but once it takes over, it will continue to maintain the labor contractions till the baby is born. The next topic we are going to discuss is about lactation.
So anatomy of the breast, you go on the inside are the muscles, then there is fatty tissue, the lobules, and from the lobules the ducts which are coming and ending at the nipple, and there is a dilated areas which can hold the milk. Now, the cyclical process of milk synthesis and secretion is termed as lactation. So, lactation occurs with the help of two hormones. One is prolactin and the other one is oxytocin. But during the second stage of lactogenesis, the breast becomes capable of milk production. But for the ongoing synthesis and secretion of human milk, the mammary gland must receive hormonal signals. These signals are produced when the baby suckles at the nipple. So, the breast is capable of lactation. Everything is ready. Alveoli are ready, the ducts are ready, but it has to be stimulated. That's why we say that when after the baby is born, and the mother, the exhaustion has gone on. The exhaustion of the baby is exhaustion of the mother after delivery or the parturition. So after that, when the baby is given to the mother, we try to put the baby to the breast. Suckling by the baby or touching of the nipple by the baby starts the secretion of milk. What is the hormone? These are oxytocin. We call it the hormone involved is in milk ejection or let down reflex. When the suckling infant suckles at the receptor, there are touch receptors, and they create an impulse which goes to the posterior pituitary to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the myoepithelial cells of the duct to expel milk into the duct, and which then is coming out from the nipple. Prolactin is a polypeptide hormone. This you have already studied from anti-pituitary. This is necessary for secretion of milk by the alveoli. So oxytocin helps the milk to be released at the nipple. And Prolactin is necessary for secretion of milk in the alveoli. And it also helps in development of the mammary tissue and all that. However, milk is not secreted then. Why? This is present even before prolactin. But it's not secreted because estrogen and progesterone both together block the action of prolactin. After delivery, levels of estrogen and progesterone both is falling, which we showed you in the first picture. First picture we showed you all the level in this parturition thing. We showed you the graph, all the things that were increasing and all the things that were decreasing, all the hormones. Over there we showed you that the estrogen and progesterone is decreasing after parturition. So this block on prolactin is removed in the milk secretion. So one is milk production, the other one is milk secretion. And again they have a positive feedback mechanism. More it suckles, the more they will work. So how suckling increases prolactin? So positive feedback. Why lactation is called as natural birth control? Because when prolactin is more, estrogen progesterone are less. They are blocked. So if they are blocked, then all those changes that happen during ovarian cycle and menstrual cycle and all that cannot take place. So it is a natural birth control. And another thing that happens is because these cycles become irregular, so we have what we call as lactational amenorrhea. And thank you so much for your attention.